Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay in Baltimore. And welcome back to Reality Asserts Itself with our series of interviews with Rob Johnson, who joins us again in the studio. Thanks for joining us again, Rob.
My pleasure.
So one more time, Rob is president of the Institute for New Economic Thinking. He's also a senior fellow and director of the Global Finance Project for the Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt Institute in New York. Previously, Robert was a managing director at Soros Fund Management, where he managed a global currency bond and equity portfolio. And he was, as I've said, one of the men who broke the Bank of England. Thanks again. Just picking up from your biography, and if you haven't watched parts prior to this, you're really going to have to pick up on the story. You made a big play with Mr. Soros in England. You made some others in Asia. You made a lot of money. You had time to sail. You went back into finance again. As I've come to know you over the last, 3 years, I guess, or 4, we've been interviewing back and forth. You were one of the most uncompromising, savage critics of the finance sector, of the politics that power engenders. You speak really unhesitatingly about all of this. That ain't the same guy that made the play with the Bank of England.
It's not clear.
How do you get from there to here?
Well, first of all, I think I'm a civilized critique of savage behavior rather than a savage critic. But I think that my sensibilities when I was a financial speculator are not at all different, or when I worked in the Senate Banking Committee, than they are now. I think the world of permissiveness in finance, the lack of enforcement, the deterioration of regulations, the so-called revolving door where regulators can leave and go to the private sector and make a lot more money, all of these things are in much worse condition than when I worked in the Senate or when I worked with Soros.
But the seeds of it was all there.
Not entirely evident ex ante, but it continued to accumulate, and it's almost like a amplifying feedback loop. The stronger it got, the more power they had, the stronger it was the pressure to unshackle things, and the more egregious the behavior could become.
Was the problem then not for you a system that allows you to break the Bank of England? Is the problem that the finance sector has gotten so out of control that it threatens the system itself?
I think that the compulsive pressure of money in politics has led to almost an abandonment of rules other than rules which transfer risk onto the back of the public to socialize the risks taken by the financial sector.
Which is the bailouts.
And the bailouts of TARP were a manifestation of that. The non-restructuring of mortgages that were underwater was a manifestation of that. The role of the central bank's enlarged balance sheet, buying things off the balance sheets of others, which were necessary to make markets work again. But I do think we were in a period that required much more profound reforms to make a proper market. You know, there are a lot of hedge fund managers that I've known over the years who do not like the structure of these markets around the too big to fail banks and constellation of subsidies.
Why?
Because they think society is right to see how distorted this is. They think they have talent. They think as financial investors, a high integrity, fair market is something that they can make money from, practice their craft. And they see the political outrage as both legitimate and threatening to whether they can continue as investors.
In 2011, you invited me to an INET conference in Bretton Woods. Mm-hmm. And I'll never forget the opening. We're in this kind of hotelish room. Not hellish room, hotelish room. And
it's where the original Bretton Woods conference was held, in that room.
Right. And George Soros is opening things, and his opening words, he looks out for a long time at all of us in the audience, and his opening words, if I remember correctly, were, "I'm bewildered." He said, and his point was, he says, I cannot understand that this system is clearly out of control. The way finance is operating, I'm sure I'm paraphrasing him here, is so destructive. And no one will listen to us as we try to caution them about the need for doing something about this. In terms of your work at INET and your voice and others who you mentioned just a bit ago, who are involved in finance and hedge funds, who share your view that this is self-destructive in the end, you seem to be marginal voices as far as I can see. You guys, I mean, George Soros, one of the most successful individual in the history of American finance, can't get listened to. He says he's bewildered how no one will listen.
Well, look, the top banks, say the top 6 banks in derivatives, earn every year more than George Soros's net worth. He's a very wealthy man. At the same time, in relation to the entire scope of the financial industry, many of whom like this unbridled system, he's relatively small financially. George Soros and INET don't pay advertising for all the major financial newspapers. We earn our media at times, but people who pay every day for advertising in a private sector media, which you might call, tend to bend the ear of the editorial board. So I'm not at all surprised, despite his reputation and expertise, or the fact that I'm an experienced practitioner, that our voice is somewhat diminished or a sidebar relative to that central game. The power political economic interests are not in agreement with us. And they,
as you use the word, have captured the politics.
Well, the politics and the media, to some degree. Politics and the media are both a little more anxious about the unbridled financial sector because there's a lot of popular outrage about too big to fail. There's a lot of popular outrage about increasing inequality where many of the top paychecks are in the financial sector. I think it's an important thing. We do need financial markets. At some level, I'm not anti-financial markets. I'm anti this particular architecture, which places too big a burden in the social contract on the back of society relative to the financial firms that are taking risk.
How do you change that when we've reached a point where that sector of finance gets to more or less choose who's president? They get to choose who runs the Fed. They usually, it seems they get, and I'm very specifically talking about President Obama here, they get to choose his financial team, or he chooses them because he knows where the money is.
The incentives are powerful. Though I will give Obama credit in the aftermath of his re-election. He did choose Janet Yellen, who has never been accused of being captured.
But that wasn't his first choice, if we're to understand.
I understand that.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of pushed on him.
But she is in the position. She has been confirmed by the Congress. I think that's a very hopeful sign that some of the broader interests of society are reflected in her focus on employment rather than on what you might call catering to the financial sector, pure and simple.
But if this sector has mostly, and maybe not completely, but mostly captured national politics and most state politics and international and most municipal, how do you break the power of that? And where, in terms of INET, where are you at on this?
Well, number one, we work on those fundamental presuppositions, the assumptions and the constructs of financial theory, and to show that things aren't quite so Panglossian and beautiful, that finance can be stable or unstable, it can be destructive, it can be constructive, is trying to reopen the debate about what kind of architecture society needs. That's held up in the intellectual halls of academia and theorists, etc. I would say there's evidence-based work going on. I've just read a very interesting report about pay-to-play schemes with so-called alternative investments in pension funds done by some scholars at Stanford University, which shows some very questionable returns for people who are investing in the state where they get the money. suggestive of political corruption. So there are scholars that are doing work that's empirical. There's discussion of the underlying financial theories. And that's what we hope at INET will, in 20 years, percolate into what becomes conventional wisdom. Another dimension at INET is to worry about money and politics, to see that markets and politics are not mutually exclusive and distinct domains, but they're inseparably intertwined. And in that context, understanding the role of money in politics, the capture, just the weight in campaign fortune, is a precursor to calling for reform of the political process in ways that, which you might call, restore the value of the vote and diminish the political value of the dollar.
Okay, we're going to pick up the story in the next segment of our interview. So please join us for our series of interviews with Rob Johnson on Reality Asserts Itself on the Real News Network.